Hi, everyone. I had the pleasure of sitting down with a dear friend of mine this past week to discuss finances. I really wish I hadn't stopped the recording because after the interview, I spent another hour getting coached by the one and only Hal Prather on some financial decisions and going deeper on the connection between purpose and money. In hindsight, our conversation could have been multiple episodes. And I'm saying this now, and Hal, if you're listening, you are welcome back anytime to do a full series on all things money. Hal is the founder and owner of Your Profit Pro. I've come to know Hal over the last 2 years as we were introduced by our wives who both run homeschool businesses and support families in the space of home education. The connection came because Hal and I both burned our corporate ladders, and we've pursued new ventures to bring balance back to the home. If you missed Hal's personal story of becoming an entrepreneur, you can go back to episode 5 to hear his burning ladder. Today, you're going to hear more about Hal's professional gifts in finance. Hal loves to bring balance to the proverbial checkbook. In the age of tech, does anyone even keep track of a checkbook anymore? Hal has the heart for helping youth learning personal finance early in their lives, and he launched his own workbook and curriculum earlier this year to support his students. But it doesn't stop there. Hal's business supports adults, families, small business owners, entrepreneurs, and nonprofits. On today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the topic of getting over the financial scarcity mindset in order to take a leap of faith. It's the one thing that I have noticed in my coaching and mentoring that many aspiring entrepreneurs are waiting to launch, but it's the lack of time on the calendar and funds in the bank and all the what-ifs around the finances that keeps people from launching. In a way, I don't blame anyone because this was my own fears for years, and it took multiple bouts of burnout to get me to jump. But I am here today and I'm still alive, and I can thank Hal and the principles around finance that have helped me keep my head on straight when fear gets the best of me. The tips on today's episode go beyond aspiring entrepreneurs. Hal has guidance for everyone who wants to be more purposeful with their money, and he even has tips for couples to resolve conflict around money. We'll dive right in after this break. You are listening to the Work Life Eubiosis podcast with your host, Charleston Edwards. If this is your first time here, welcome. My goal is simple: to eradicate burnout and to bring harmony, purpose, and balance to this world, starting with the family. My hope is that this show and the story shared will provide encouragement and ideas that will be valuable to you on your journey to work-life freedom. So let's dive in to today's episode. Hal, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you tell the audience a bit about yourself and how you got into personal finance?
Oh, thank you, Charleston. I appreciate you having me on the show here. I originally, how I got into personal finance from the start. I originally studied accounting and personal finance, risk management when I was in college, and that was back, early 1990s. So we're going back a few years. But right after I graduated, I had several ventures where that included small business bookkeeping. I was working for a certified financial planner as I began that journey. And I started to work on my CFP designation, my Certified Financial Planner designation. And after a few years of working in that space, though, I realized that helping others who maybe already had money determine how to plan for more secure retirements, that was a ton of fun, but it wasn't really my passion. I just didn't feel a lot of tug there. So I turned to another personal finance angle and began working as a counselor for a consumer credit counseling service. You may have heard that as CCCS. That was kind of a complete 180 from working in the financial planning space to working in financial crisis avoidance. Is what I would call that. And what I discovered in that time was that regardless of income, so regardless of whether someone was a high income earner or struggling with income issues, we all struggle in some ways with the day-to-day handling of our finances. So my counseling days could easily run the gamut of someone making a very high income to someone who was on the lower income scale. And what I found was we all break the same. We have the exact same problems, just on a different scale. So yeah, long story short from there, and how I've kind of come back to personal finance. In my time working at Consumer Credit, I did get involved in software development. I always had enjoyed technology, right? And I had a great career move where I had a great boss that gave me an opportunity to begin to learn some of that. And I got involved in the high tech space, and actually after a few years got involved in high tech consulting, got to travel the world and do some really fun stuff. But after quite a while of doing that, my burning ladder, and we talked about that in some of your podcasts before, was getting out of a high tech career, and that served me financially very well. But I knew that wasn't my purpose. That wasn't what I was called to do. I had fun with it, but it didn't feed me. It didn't feel like it was feeding me, which told me that, Hal, you're created for something different, right? And so I got back to my purpose, and that's what I know is I'm here to do, is to help others make sense of money and live with purpose and meaning as they tie their financial lives to their real life, so to speak. So that's how I've come full circle, how I got into finance, and maybe how I've come full circle to it.
Well, thank you for sharing that, how you started off in finance and then you navigated towards technology, and then technology, high tech, as you said it, back to finance. Can you tell me, A, how long you've been back in doing personal finance and coaching? And two, what was your biggest fear leaving your career to now support your financial and coaching endeavors?
Sure. Yeah, I've been back in the personal finance space coaching for several years now, about 2 years. And I knew that was where I kind of wanted to take it. I didn't have everything felt out, all the way, like exactly. I was a little bit in the dark with it, but not all the way. Because I knew we had built a homeschool business that allowed me some runway, right? And I think that's a key thing that people need to focus on. But my biggest concerns leaving the high-tech world, because it was a well-paying job. It was retirement savings was probably number one. I thought, now I'm getting rid of a 401k match, and I'm getting rid of this really nice, retirement savings, which has always been a part of what I really try to make sure as a family we were keeping money aside for the future. So that really concerned me. Also, I was concerned about Social Security reductions, because I knew that, the top earning years, and I was kind of getting into my top earning years. They say that your early 50s, late 40s, early 50s are the biggest time you're at your peak earning, right? And so luckily, I had shed a lot of those $0 years or low income years from my early 20s. I had shed a lot of those out of the system through the 35 years that we have to focus on for Social Security payments as we begin to draw them down later on. So I was concerned about that. And then also healthcare. We've been on a health sharing ministry for quite a while, for probably 10 or 12 years. I was even doing it at my old job just because of some of the, beliefs I had with healthcare. So we were using healthcare sharing prior. So I knew we had healthcare, but in the event that something came up, in the back of my mind, I still had worries there.
No, thank you for sharing. And just to summarize what I heard, retirement, Social Security reductions, and healthcare, those are the three biggies in regards to fear, but also just where fear turned into an actionable plan. And you mentioned the word runway, which sounded like a core principle towards making any decision, and for your decision to leave a corporate to go back into entrepreneurship. So what can you go a little bit deeper into your philosophies of building a runway?
Oh, yes. Well, it's not putting airplanes up and doing all that stuff. It's making sure you have the room to leap, right? And that you've really thought through what it takes to live as you, what your expenses are, really knowing how that looks, so that you can build some times if things are lean, what you need before you take off, right? I think that I'm not sure if that's why it's called runway, now that I think about it, but that's how I would look at it is, yes, before I take off, how much runway do I have?
That is a perfect explanation, and we'll come back to that here in a little bit. But before so, I want to go into a little bit of what you do now. I know that you teach teenagers about personal finance and just the fundamentals of managing money. When I was in school, finance was not taught to me. I've had to learn the hard way of just through young adulthood. But you're a lot closer to the space. Is finance taught in high schools or in college anymore? And what are you doing to narrow that gap?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I look back on the counseling days that I mentioned earlier when I was working for consumer credit, and I would just solidify the fact that you asked me that question is like, yeah, I heard that in counseling a lot. I would be working with a counselee, and I would hear, Mr. Prather, I just really wish I had learned more about these concepts when I was in high school. And we're going back 30 or 40 years, right? Now, we have made a ton of progress. Fast forward to my coaching practice now, and I would be coaching an adult, someone say 40, 50. I've even coached people is in the span of early retirement, early stages of retirement, like 70 or 72. And I would hear them say, hey, would you teach my grandchild or my grandson or my granddaughter, or would you teach my child? They're 14. They don't know any of these things. And so my thought was, well, no, but I did hear that all the time 30 years ago. So someone's telling me I should do that, right? And yeah, I have done, I think Dave Ramsey has a great program for even for homeschoolers or high schoolers. And I led that several times in our church or even smaller groups. But I had a lot that I wanted to say on the topic that I have learned over the years. So I built my own high school curriculum for that. And you asked the question, how are we doing as a society? Only 26 states, only like half of our states have a requirement. I know Georgia's one of them. I think you're in West Virginia, right? So West Virginia is another one. And they have begun to require some kind of economics or, some sort of personal finance curriculum as a stipulation for high school graduation. But yeah, I just think it's sad that only half of our states are. So we have room to go there. We have a lot of room to keep moving as a society.
I've never heard that statistic. That is pretty staggering and alarming. And I appreciate what you're doing to narrow that gap of educating. And, as you both counsel teens and adults, do you have different philosophies? Are you have a curriculum for teens, but how does that, what is the difference between how you navigate counseling someone in their midlife versus a teenager?
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's, it's a different set of things to think through. Like as a teenager, you have an open book, you have nothing has been laid down in their lives yet, right? So you have the opportunity to teach some of, like, for example, one of the things we work through with teenagers, and it's actually one of the most popular weeks of my class, is the week on vocation. I like to say measure twice, cut once, right? So hopefully in doing that, hopefully we can have the start for that teenager, that young adult, to begin their careers on a path that they know fits both their purpose and their passion. And then they won't wake up at 30 and say, "Ooh, I'm on the wrong path," right? So they've either spent a lot of money, have a lot of sunk costs in education or other training mechanisms. So that's kind of, I think, where we are. And it's funny that vocation is the most popular. I polled the students, what was your favorite week? It was actually nothing about investing or growing your money or even stewardship. I call it stewardship, but budgeting. Nothing about that. It was about, well, what do I want to do with it? That's what they found the most fun or engaging. And then with the adults, it is different because a lot of times you're having to work through, where do we go now? What do we do now?
Very insightful, Hal. There's such an overlap between the journey of young adults and those that are facing midlife. It's one of the reasons that I have you on today. I found that most people are prone to drift from purpose. Once we have families and careers that we're building simultaneously, the expenses pile up, but so does our time. And then when we reach a place of contemplation of how to best spend our time, we come to a place of introspection of what to change. And the biggest obstacle in the way of making any sort of change typically comes back to finances. So my question to you is, how would you advise someone that wants to change to reverse engineer their life back to a life of purpose and not to worry about the financial implications?
Okay. I think, we all have to start somewhere. So if we haven't been, life begins to happen and things begin to unravel very quickly. And you asking that makes me think back to when I wrote my Burning Ladders story. And it was being ever mindful of your purpose, right? When life starts to happen, kids, life, situations, challenges, we can all begin to, I think I put in somewhere in that Burning Ladder story, we're paddling down the river and the rapids get fast, right? But we have to rest. We have to, work out of rest. So we have to think, sometimes it may even be a non-financial thing at first, where we just find places and find ways to sit on the banks of the river instead of paddling all the time and really begin to think things through. And that's when I say we have to start at some place. That isn't just a pause. It may be a retreat. It may be a time to think through with our spouse, where are we right now? And how can it's getting out of the race temporarily. You have to be engaged. You have to be involved in employment but finding that moment to really assess. And that gets into how you draw up your spending plan. And you can only do that if you're completely thoughtful and mindful of where you need to be spending your money and saving your money.
I appreciate that answer. It aligns with a lot of the philosophies that I coach on doing a retreat, coming together, aligning as a family to dream and then to put an action into place. So you do that one time, but what is the method moving forward? How would you advise a family to take actionable steps? What does that look like on a bi-weekly, a monthly, a quarterly basis? What are those small steps that they can take?
I think you have to assess. Well, first you assess where you are right now and you make a plan. Again, notice I'm consciously using the word plan, not budget. Budget turns a lot of people off in terms of how they think about, I don't want to do a budget. It's just a scary word for a lot of people. It's got a bad name, bad rap. So I think in terms of like, okay, here's our pile of money. Here's not forecasting out in the future like, well, in October, I'm going to spend this much. In November, I'm going to spend. No, only deal with what you have right now, one time right now. And as you had asked me, how often do you do that? It's every time you're paid. Every time you're paid, once you have your initial baseline in place, every time you're paid, and I say paid, it could be a paycheck. It could be a bonus. It could be a tax refund. It could be a gift. It could be an inheritance. It could be interest that you earn on a bank account. It could be money you found on the street. It doesn't matter. One of the things, I'm a YNAB certified coach, which is a product called You Need a Budget. And one of the things that I learned in that certification course was really, really insightful to me was the biases that we have around money. You know, a dollar is a dollar is a dollar. But so often we think of, hey, I earned a dollar. I worked hard for that dollar. It was in my paycheck. Well, what if I gave you $100? Well, Hal gave me $100. You look at that, the bias is, oh, great, we're going to go out to eat dinner tonight, right? Because I just got this gift that Hal dropped in my lap of $100. But really, that $100 might be served. You got to look at that in the whole plan. So you're rebalancing that plan every time, not just weekly, biweekly, quarterly, annually. You may do those things as a matter of course, just to see how the overall categories look in your budget. But as far as only budgeting money you have, it's every time you get new money.
This episode is brought to you by Own Your 5 to 9, an organization committed to freeing families of the rat race and burnout. Every organization has a leader, mission, and a set of values that drives the organization. But this is commonly missed in the most important organization in the world, the family. An organization has one mission for how it will impact the world. Why not the family? An organization goes into strategic planning routinely to align its values, mission, and projects. Why not the family? Whose Home, a strategic planning guide for families, is a workbook and a tool needed in all households. Whose Home takes a strategic planning approach with 10 guided exercises to define your core family values, family mission, and tools to operationalize how your family does life together. If your family is facing a big decision, Whose Home is for you. If you're considering a career pivot, Whose Home is also for you. If you desire more intentionality and harmony in your home, Whose Home is for you. Create a healthy culture, not a hustle culture, at home. Visit ownyour5to9.com to claim your copy today. So what do you think about having an emergency fund? So let's just say you have a monthly budget and all of a sudden new money comes in, right? So let's just say the $100. $100 came out of nowhere. How would you advise a family not to spend that $100 on a fancy meal, but taking that $100 and apply it to the plan that's in place?
Great. So it's one question. It's one simple question. I got this money. What do I need to do with this money before I get more money? Before I'm paid again, before whatever. Just what do I need this to do right now? And see, that's forcing a rebalance. And it's not, if you've got your plan laid out with full categories, we could talk about how you do that as well. But getting that plan in place and working through the steps to get to that plan, once you have that plan in place, it really comes down to that one question. What do I need this money to do until I get more money? Your priorities are forced on you basically with that.
Right. So let's just take this same principle. We have a W-2 employee who wants to be independent. So going back to building that runway, if finance is the major obstacle of going from employment to entrepreneurship, what are the first few steps you would advise for that individual and family to take financially to make that leap? Is there a specific amount of money that should be in the bank? Is it, are you budgeting for that jump? And where do you build some of the same fears you talked about earlier around insurance, retirement, and Social Security? So what are those steps that employee is going to take?
That employee. So as a W-2 employee or yeah. I think as a W-2 employee, you're really looking at like a personal spending plan, right? So the first thing you want to look at is, if you're not having to reinvest in a business and you're strictly on a W-2, is look at the reality of today. What are your monthly bills? So what are you required to pay? Here we are in October. What are you required to pay in October right now? Can you meet all those needs? Yes. Okay, great. Now, next sort of phase or level would be to look at what are often called your true expenses, right? YNAB would call those true expenses. And when you think about true expenses, it's something that's not necessarily a monthly bill. The biggest examples there are home maintenance, car maintenance, gifts, giving. What do you want to do for charity that maybe you don't give to every single month, but you want to periodically give to? It's basically just a non-monthly expense. And that could be a have to have, but not that you have to have, but it's going to have to happen. You're going to need new tires. It's going to happen, right? They're going to wear out. And making sure that you talked about emergency fund a little while ago. You almost, when you start to do that, I wouldn't say you ever get away from maybe wanting to have what you call an emergency fund. Like in your head, you may call it an emergency fund, but you're natively or inherently building in an emergency fund that's more specific when you thoughtfully think through those true expenses, right? And then once you go beyond those true expenses, what are your dreams? Your dream, in the case of a W-2 employee that maybe is going through some burnout and wants to either make a job switch, it could be back over to another W-2. That's cool. Or it could be something that they've been thinking about doing with their own business. Maybe some of those dreams are, I want to specifically name that Freedom Fund or Runway Fund or whatever you want to call it, right? And as you've met those tiers of needs, those tiers of, even call it tiers of wants to some degree, when you've built those out, those are sort of the steps. Does that make sense how that kind of would flow through? Yeah. And then you've built that runway, and now you've got everything in place.
So there's the reality of today and the true expenses. What about the individual who has lots of debt? Would you advise that person not to take the leap? Or how would you approach advising them on paying off the debt in alignment with making a career pivot?
Yeah, I definitely coach against that leap at that point. I do think, debt gives, lack of debt will give you options. Debt limits the options that we have, right? So I definitely coach someone against making that leap, especially to solely relying on their own income outside of a W-2, until they're off of that financial cliff a little bit, right? So they're just a little bit away from that place. The foundation of it all is awareness. If you've built up debt, most times, not all the time, there could be catastrophic events that happen that cause debt. So I don't want to discount that. That can definitely happen. But as a foundation, it's usually lack of awareness. And the number one place that happens is in those true expenses. We get surprised by what we don't think through, right? So we're, oh no, I needed new tires. Didn't think about that, right? And so if you have some of those things in place and know what it costs to be you first, beyond that, you build up the buffer. And then after you have that buffer in place and, you're debt free, that debt should not be in the picture. I think some people are more comfortable with it. This is my way of doing it, my way of coaching. Some people may say, I'm okay with what I might consider a low debt to income ratio. If you can work on that and feel free in that, I'm not going to say don't do it necessarily. I would strongly consider being debt free first, though. Yeah.
No, that's really, really insightful. You mentioned the word awareness being foundational. And this is a family show. We believe in strong families and healthy families, but we also know that opposites attract. So when it comes in marriages, we typically find one unit of the marriage being very budget savvy and another unit of the marriage being a free spirit. So what's your advice for continuing or building a strong, healthy family, knowing that there may be two philosophies on how the subject of money is approached?
Well, I don't think my wife would mind me saying, you just described us in a nutshell. She's more of a free spirit and I'm more of a saver, right? So, and yes, I find that in coaching that often, more often than not, that I can tell the spender and the saver, or they'll tell me who the spender and saver is, right? And we'll work through that. But really, a spending plan, it gives power to the spender and it gives freedom to the saver, right? If you're a saver, you're probably like, and I would say this is I'm a saver naturally, right? And I say natural bend towards saving. You've probably looked at money from a scarcity mindset, or you've looked at money as security, and that's not where our security should come from. It's not from a bank account, right? And what I find that spending plans help us do, and this is why it's just been so impactful for me as a coach over the past couple of years to really see it, is when you have a plan built out and you've been thoughtful with it, you have the freedom to let go of your money. So I'm speaking solely again from the saver side, right? I can go, it's okay. I can spend this money because I know XYZ is covered, right? I may have some stress if XYZ are not covered, but we can have that, my wife and I can have that discussion, right? To figure out how we are going to get it covered. So that's the saver mindset. From the spender mindset, it's the realization, it forces, when we get back to giving every dollar a job, and when you get back to only planning in your spending plan with the money you actually have, it forces the scarcity. So in some ways, it helps a little bit of a freedom perspective to go, well, and it may not feel like it at the time, but it will be when they want to spend on something bigger or more important to them. It forces a prioritization for the spender because money is a finite resource that we have. It's just something that comes through our hands. I always say, they call it currency for a reason because money comes through it's a current, right? It's based on the value we give to the world and what the world gives us back in terms of money, the gifts that have been bestowed upon us through, opportunities the Lord's given us. Then we're to steward that. So if we're spending frivolously, then we're going to not necessarily have all the options that we want. And so I hope that helps explain sort of how a spender and a saver. Oh, one other thing I would say on that, Charleston, is categories within your budget that are, for example, I know your wife, Kelly, right? So Kelly has a spending fund and Charleston has a spending fund. And it's kind of a no questions asked in terms of like, I wanted to stop at the store and buy this new microphone, or I wanted to get my nails done. So your wife wants to go get her nails done. And she, maybe you have a nails category, a cosmetics category, that's fine. But if that's been overspent and Kelly says, well, Charleston, I have money in that account for that purpose. Okay, she can move it. And it just gives you a little bit of, couples aren't fighting as much when they each have some money to work with on it. Yeah.
It's a way of planning your finances to resolve conflict when there's freedom on both sides. So I really, really like that. And what I really love about everything that you just said, it's a mindset, right? So as you coach and consult, what I'm hearing is really changing the mindset of how you look at your money. Instead of being fearful of all the things that can happen, you are looking at it much more from a confident angle, from a value, from a purpose, right? And as you said, money is a finite resource, so it has meaning to what you give it, right? So how much of your work are you seeing that it's more of a mindset coaching versus the practicalities?
Oh, now that I think about it, that's hearing you say that makes me really see that it's probably the vast majority of the time. It's it's really about helping someone align. We all have our lives. We all have things we want to do, things we need to do, things we have to do, but we never really align those to our finances. And that mindfulness, and that is sort of the mindset we want to get into, is just being thoughtful about what we, it's the approach. It's not being haphazard as we may want to be, or not just looking at a bank account and going, yep, I can cover that. No problem. Yeah, a spender is going to see $10,000 in the bank account and go, oh, cool, we can go do that. Well, maybe not, right? And a saver may see the $10,000 and go, well, it's only $10,000. What about, we want to finish the next room. We have a home project we want to do. What about that? So they're seeing it from two different ways, right?
Yeah. Well, sounds like you would make a great marriage counselor too, Hal.
It does borderline sometimes on that, but I would never say that I'm a marriage counselor.
Well, I like to pivot as we close out this conversation to one or two more questions, because I have a lot of entrepreneurs that follows this podcast, and we're both entrepreneurs and small business owners. So as small businesses or independent contractors, we can wear all the hats. And because we wear all the hats, there's a time scarcity mindset comes without systems in place. And I think this goes for business finances as well. So I know you do a lot of personal finance, but from a business practicality, how would you advise entrepreneurs to reinvest profits back into the business? How would you advise them on saving for hard times as a business while also making sure we're paying ourselves? And part B to this question, and you may answer it in part A, is there a good time to scale, and is there a good time to not scale as a business?
Okay. Yeah, I would say, if any of your listeners are small business owners, they've probably heard of the Profit First method. Mike Michalowicz, wrote that book, and it's a great place to start. In fact, I would say loosely based on that, I think every business owner, and a lot of what I coach, I find, and this is how it worked, because it worked for me in our business as well. I started spending plans personally, and then that evolved into making sure I was doing them for our own business, using the same principles, but just putting the business spin on them, right? And a lot of my coaching is with small business owners, helping them with cash flow management. So specifically to that question, it's take the 10% right up front. It's kind of like a business tithing thing, so to speak of, right? And you're just putting that aside as like a profit. So I'm not going to touch this money. I'm just going to build this up. And then take the remaining 90%, and whether you put it into OpEx, your operating expenses, whether you put that into paying yourself through either a W-2, setting yourself up with a payroll system and doing a W-2, or whether it's through owner withdrawals. So handling the operational expenses, handling the payroll, so to speak, even if it is just to yourself, but then revisiting that profit category that you've been building up. So as you receive new income from services or products that you sell or work with, over that time, over 90 days, whatever, you're going to have built up some profit. So at that time, that's the time to kind of revisit and go, okay, I have X amount of money, depending upon the last quarter, how the last quarter looked. I can either, if it was a bad quarter, I may want to take all of that 10% and put it back into the business, right? If I've had the opportunity to build up, say, 3 months ahead of payroll, or 3 months ahead of payroll and operating expenses, well, I can take that 10% and take all of it out as an owner's distribution. Or if I even want to sort of reduce, some of my income, maybe put that in as a solo 401k contribution, right? And we're not getting too far into specific financial advice here, but it's, where do you want to, do you have some options? Work with your accountant and figure out, if I take some of this and put it into, my solo 401k, can it reduce sort of the overall expenses that I have, therefore reducing my taxes, right? So if you want to know when is it time to coast, or when is it time to go back into the business, using that profit first, or that, I like to say, just use that 10% and get into, there's a lot more nuance that Mike Michalowicz will walk through in his book about that, if you ever want to go into follow it to a T. But that's how I coach on it, is just keep yourself a little bit aside, and then either quarterly reinvest it back into the business, or quarterly pull out what you need or need to put into your retirement and paying yourself for yourself 20 years from now.
So it seems like this would be quite intuitive, but that 10% that you're taking out each time should have its own separate account so you can visually see it, or would you advise something else?
Great question. Mike Michalowicz in the Profit First method definitely advise on that, like a separate account for everything. To me, this is how I operate and how I coach, is that way overcomplicates things, I think. To me, if you are following a specific spending plan, if you have that set up, and I think the reason Michalowicz says this maybe for a discipline standpoint, like if I don't see it, I won't touch it. But if you're following your spending plan and you've got that money earmarked, and you're not going to deviate from that. You don't need to build in the complexity, because you're just saying, I'm going to move money here and move money there and move. It's very complex. I'm about simple systems. So taking whatever you need to take from the profit category and moving it down to another category that serves you better after that you've reviewed that quarter as a business. That's how I do it. So I don't say put it in a separate account personally, right?
Along the same lines, as small businesses, we're not getting paid every 2 weeks, and our taxes will work a little bit differently. So let's just say you have money coming in 3 or 4 times a year and it's not consistently coming in. How do you advise small businesses to make sure they're set enough aside to pay off their either quarterly taxes or end of the year taxes?
Okay, good question. Well, outside of working with your accountant to figure out what those needs might be, because I think first you need to have that good professional advice from your accountant to say, what do I need to do with this?
Yep.
From there, you ask yourself the very same question that you ask yourself on the personal side.
Yep.
If you're only paid if you have an variable income is I think that's one of the most eye-opening experiences on my client side. Those who do have a variable income is, when I ask my question, what do I need to do? What does the money need to do before I'm paid again? Okay,
Yep.
Now you can just answer, where do you need that money to go? I'm going to need to put aside $500 into this estimated tax column, right? My accountant said I needed $4,000, so I'm going to put $1,000 in there, whatever it might be. But it always rolls back to, what do I need this money to do until I'm paid again, right?
Wonderful.
Because think about that. If you think about, and this is something that really just blew my mind from hearing the folks at Why Not talk about this. Every dollar that you have is a savings dollar, and every dollar you have is a spending dollar. And I would almost say that every dollar you have is a savings dollar from the perspective, you're going to spend that. You're going to save that dollar. Eventually, you're going to spend it. So if you put money aside for groceries, let's say you're ahead a month. If you've gotten yourself ahead a month, and you put aside, $1,000 for groceries for November, you may not spend that money on groceries until 60 days from now, right? Or 30 days from now. But you're still going to. So you saved it for that, but you're going to spend it, right?
Yep.
So thinking of your money in that way, I think is a really, really neat way to think of it. And that's something that came straight out of. There's some Why Not blog posts on it that have talked about every dollar being a savings dollar and every dollar being a spending dollar. It's so true.
Wow. You are full of wisdom, Hal. And I think this is a great place to wrap up. And, before you share where people can get a hold of you, if you have one piece of advice to give to any of our listeners about personal or professional finance, what would that be?
I think first and foremost, just know what it costs to be you. If you had to sum it up in one sentence, what does it cost to be you? And then don't rely on a bank balance to be your guide. You create your spending plan. That'll help strengthen you, get you out of a scarcity mindset. Your spenders will spend from that, and your savers will operate out of not having so much fear. And they'll have a peace that everything's covered. So know what it costs to be you.
Wow. Hal, thank you. This has been beneficial to me. That's a powerful quote that I may have to put on a Post-it note all across my office here. What does it cost to be me? Wow. So thank you. Hal, can you let everyone know how to get a hold of you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm not really, I don't really operate on social media too much. My wife definitely does, but I don't. I'm not on Facebook or Instagram. But I am on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Hal Prather, on LinkedIn. Or you can find me directly on my website, which is yourprofitpro.com. Or you can email me directly at hal@yourprofitpro.com.
Thank you. And also, when you land on Hal's website, he does have a newsletter called, what is it called?
Margin Minute. Yeah.
Margin
it's
Minute.
a couple of tips every now and then for how to live, give, and grow.
Perfect. Yes, I received one last week and it's full of wisdom. So I do encourage anyone that's listening to go to Hal's website and subscribe to this newsletter.
Thanks, Charleston. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Hal, and thank you for sharing so many practical tips for the audience today.
It's fun chatting with you. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I can't thank Hal enough for being on the podcast and sharing a world of wisdom as it relates to not only our finances, but to life. Unless you were born with a money tree in your backyard, I think there was something for everyone to take from this conversation. And in case you missed it or you weren't in a position to take notes, I'd like to quickly summarize some of the applications, the quotes, and golden nuggets that Hal left us. The first, and probably the biggest piece of advice, is the power of awareness. With awareness comes clarity, then confidence, and then action. Next, we can apply awareness, clarity, and action to the biggest fears around money, which is retirement savings, Social Security reductions, and health care cost. Next, Hal said, you don't have to have it all figured out when making the leap. Have a plan, but hold it loosely. Instead of calling it a budget, especially if this is a bad word in your home or causes friction, call it a spending plan or savings plan. And if there's a conflict on the spender and the saver in the family, create a category that each of you will have the freedom to spend within your category. Whenever you receive a paycheck or new money, start the budgeting process with one question. What do I need to do with this money right now? What do I need this money to do? This forces a rebalance every time you receive a paycheck. And then next, we got into the power of knowing your purpose, and Hal's advice was to measure twice and cut once. That means to take your time in learning your why, your purpose, before investing. This goes for both the young and the old, right? And then, this was really powerful. Hal said our true security and value does not come from our bank account. When we realize this, we have the freedom and contentment to let go of money. This changes the mindset from a scarcity mindset into a stewardship mindset. Don't lean on the bank balance to be your guide. Next, when it comes to purpose and financial planning, let's look to rest more and work from a place of rest instead of working to rest. Regardless of the financial situation or future planning, Hal says to know your true expenses, which are the basic needs from food, shelter, and transportation. Make a tier and base it on needs versus wants. And next, if you're going to take the leap, it's wise to build a runway. Reduce debt first, create a savings plan, and know where every dollar is going, because debt limits options. Build awareness on the true expenses. Not the monthly bills per se, but the true expenses as it comes to routine maintenance of things that you own. Hal summarized this by saying, know what it costs to be you. And then lastly, which is Hal's philosophy for life and the theme of his imprint on this world, live, give, and grow. Have a good week. Thank you for listening to the Work-Life Eubiosis podcast, part of the work-life resources created by Own Your 5 to 9. I hope that you have found encouragement and a few ideas to strengthen your journey to purpose, freedom, and balance. Have you overcome burnout and found a new way of life? Millions around the globe are still at the risk of burnout and losing it all. And your story may be the one that sparks not only a dream, but action. Visit ownyour5to9.com for more information and submit your story. While you're there, join the Work-Life Eubiosis newsletter and receive additional resources weekly right to your inbox. If you enjoy this podcast, take time to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Share it with a friend or loved one. Remember, the most important organization in the world is the family. Let's do our part to strengthen it. Thank you for listening.